Hello. Today on the show, I am so excited to have as my guest Sara Moses. Sara is a professional speaker and podcast host and mindset coach with a master's in psychology and a passion for helping others overcome trauma. Don't let her polished, poised, impossibly optimistic personality fool you. A survivor of abuse and anguish herself, who managed to triumph over tragedy, Sarah has made it her mission to help her clients move through seemingly insurmountable challenges and achieve their goals. With a focus on taking action, developing cognitive mastery, and cultivating gratitude, Sarah empowers her clients with the tools they need to not merely survive, but thrive. She believes that with practice and mindfulness, it's possible to find beauty even in grief. And she's committed to sharing her hard earned wisdom and helping anyone she works with create the life they want and deserve. I will put links in the show notes, but Sarah can be reached at hello@saramoses.com. And her Instagram is at the real Sara Moses. So I'm really looking to this interview and please welcome Sara Moses to the show. Hi, Sarah.
Hi,
Welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for coming on today.
hi, Julie. Thank you for having me on today. I'm very honored. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. And I loved it in your bio, like you said that you have a master's in psychology. I have a bachelor's in psychology, so we have that in common. And that you
Oh,
also talked about like, you're a trauma survivor as well. And I can totally relate to that too. And I know that you've had some losses and so, like what um ever you kind of want to share about that or
mhm.
about your background? I mean, it all sounds very interesting. So, and
Oh, thank
so yeah. Um
Yeah, I think you know, I was so intrigued when I heard about the book that you were writing because I definitely have since these things have happened in my life more recently, I did have some very traumatic things from my childhood, and then I sort of went through this period of life where things seemed to be, going smoothly for a couple of decades, and then life surprises you, right? Where
yeah.
I lost my father and my brother and my cousin all a very short period of time, right after COVID, during
Mm.
COVID and right after COVID. And my brother and then my first cousin, they actually died in very tragic ways. And it just shocked me to the core, took me down. And I, during those times in life, you have a choice. You can stay down or you can get back up, right? And I decided that I was not going to let those, their deaths and that loss and that grief. Two things: I wasn't going to let it destroy me.
Mhm.
Because I have daughters and I knew that they were watching me. And, I think that our children sometimes are watching us to see, well, if mom's okay, then we're going to be okay. Right.
Um,
So there was a huge motivation and inspiration for me to leave no stone unturned to try to find out how to grieve in a healthy way and to make sure that their deaths were not in vain, if that makes sense. I wanted to do
yeah.
something in honor of them. And what I decided to do, which might sound like a strange concept, but I was like, I'm going to live the life that they didn't get to live,
Yeah.
and not just living for myself, but I'm going to live for my brother and for my cousin. And what that made happen in my life is I became much braver. I had a lot more courage. I decided all the things that I'd ever wanted to do in my life, I was going to go out and do them because it was like what was stopping me before was fear and insecurity and imposter syndrome and worrying about what other people thought. But after going through what I'd gone through, all of that sort of faded away, right? Would you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I love that because it empowered like it's like death kind of takes you apart, like you're the moth, right? And you go into the chrysalis and you kind of just turn to mush for a while, right? And then you
Mhm.
reemerge like a new person. Like it changes your perspective on everything. I completely relate to that. I definitely became braver, and yeah, I love what you said about like doing the things that they didn't get to do. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, and I love how you said how it sort of recreates us because it changed me so much and transformed me so much that I became a different person and I like this person better. I like my life more. It's not, I wouldn't say it's easier, and I
Mhm.
wouldn't say that, you know, uh, there's not a lot of still sadness and grief, but the person who I've become, who's had to stand and face that and still go on, I admire who I've become more than the person I was. And so uh, I've tried to find when I can the good, because
Mhm.
that sort of becomes something too, right? We
Yeah.
can we can see, darkness and sadness and grief and loss all around us,
Mhm.
or we can decide I started every day was like I'm going to go looking for the good. I'm going to look for the good, I'm going to find the good, and then I wanted to start helping other people to find the good too. So that became sort of a mission.
Absolutely. I completely relate to that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's empowering. It's really strange. You go through this transformation and I got
Mhm.
cat hair on my mouth. You go through this transformation and yeah, you're just I don't know if I felt lost for a while, you
Yes.
know? And I think looking for the good, I don't know if it's just it was kind of I don't know if it was a coping mechanism, but it helped, right? I mean, you can't dwell in
Yeah.
that grief, you'll just stay down, like you said. And yeah, so what were some of the things that you did, some of the changes that you made where and, like starting to help other people and things like that?
Yeah, so what happened was I had wanted to when I was younger, I wanted to be either an actor or a newscaster or a public speaker. And life, how things get in the way, and I went down a different path and I got married and I had children. I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time, and then slowly got back into work, and I was doing more construction remodeling, and I was doing some life coaching and things like that. But I have to say, if I look back on it now, I kind of feel like I was living a little bit of a timid life. I wasn't really going after my dreams. At that time I was supporting my husband, at the time, now my ex-husband. He was an actor. I was supporting his dreams. I was
Mm,
supporting my children's dreams, and I was sort of living this quiet, timid life, not that intentional about what I was going after in my
mm,
life. And so I I just got to this point where I thought, whoa, wait a second. What did I want to do with my life? What were my dreams? What was my calling that's always been there? And is there something in that I could do that could help other people? So I decided to become a public speaker, an inspirational speaker at the age of 54, late in
I
life,
love
starting up
it.
a brand new career, right? And I decided I was going to go out and do this, and I knew that it was going to take courage because I had suffered from stuttering a lot as a child. I
Mm,
stuttered until I was about 6 or 7 years old,
mm,
and I just also suffered from some insecurity issues and from, as I said, imposter syndrome, and had become so comfortable, as I said, in that role of always sort of being in the background and supporting other people, that I knew to be able to step out and do this was going to take a lot of courage.
yeah.
But because the pain had been so deep, and the grief, you know what I'm talking
Mm,
about, that
I do.
time, and there's
Mhm.
a long period of time where you have to just go through it.
You do. Yeah.
I was able, though, to use that as it was like a fire in my belly, became like the fuel to help me to propel me forward and
Yeah.
go after these dreams that I had, and put myself in situations where I was on stage in front of hundreds of people and had to rise to the occasion and do it. And what's interesting is my why was so big, that
Mhm.
all of those things sort of faded into the background and they weren't important. They weren't at the forefront anymore. What
Yeah.
was in the forefront was I've got, sort of my arms linked, one through my brother's arm and one through my cousin's arm, and I'm like, "We're going onto the stage together, and we're gonna have a message, and we're gonna show people that horrible, terrible things can happen, and we can still carry on because, that's a choice you make,
Yes.
and the other choice isn't a good one, you
Not a
know,
good one. No.
right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I don't know if you can
I
relate to
feel
that.
same, so much. So much, yeah, it's like you get through that and that grief, it's just so powerful, and then you're like, "Well, wow, if I could do that, if I could help my mother die, for 10
Mhm,
weeks, I could do
mm,
anything," right? And
mhm,
in the presence of my father who was, the cause of a lot of my trauma, right?
mhm,
He was
mhm,
there too, and I had to navigate that and try to hold space for her in his space, and he
mhm,
wasn't doing anything to make it any easier, right? So, like, yeah, there was so much healing that came
mm,
because of transcending those things that, yeah, it's really fascinating too, which is why I love this topic and I love hearing other people's stories. And there's a lot of commonality, I feel like, for those of us who've gone through
mhm,
a significant death. Not that they're not all significant, but
mhm,
there's those deaths that like my grandparents died, but I didn't see them very much, right? But then there's that life-altering death, and I think that first life-altering death that you have, it really can just knock you down. And
yeah,
for
yeah.
you, it was your brother? Was that the first really
The first,
major loss for you?
the first death was, my dad,
Mhm,
during COVID, and the sadness about that was, I don't know if you remember during that time, family members were not allowed to visit.
mhm,
And so for the last 4 months of his life, he was in the, veterans home, down near San Diego, California, which is about 4 hours from me, but my brother and sister lived down there, and so they were able, prior to COVID, to see him weekly, and I would go down and visit with him as well, but during that time, those 4 months, we didn't get to see him,
mm,
and he was alone there without family visiting, and I think that sort of broke his heart, and he, uh he just wasn't willing to maybe fight the way he had been able to before. And, it's interesting because during that time, not only were family members not able to visit, but we also were not able to visit even if the person was close to passing. And so when the nurses knew it was happening, they reached out to us because, interestingly enough, they were willing to break the rules. This is sort of this little secret thing that happened, but my dad had been a really, really funny man, charming, and he used to tell all these jokes, and all the nurses were just in love with my dad. I think he was probably 88 when he passed, and he was still cracking jokes and making them laugh, and they adored him. And they reached out to us and they said, "We're going to find a way for you to come in and say goodbye to your dad, but there's only about 24, 48 hours for you." To get here. So it's sort of a funny story. My brother and sister went together the moment they got the call, and then I'm farther away. I was able to come down the next day, and I remember driving up to the, you would normally just drive in, and there was this large parking lot, and you would park, and then you would go and sign in, and I remember pulling up, and now instead of it being, free to drive in, there was a guard there and you couldn't drive in. And I said, "Oh, I'm here to see my dad." And he said, "No, no, sorry, there's no visitors." And I said, "No, I think I have special permission." And he said, "No, absolutely not." And then I said, "Well, my brother and my sister were here yesterday." And he leans in and he said, "What's your dad's name?" And I told him, and he gives me this funny look, and he kind of turns away and moves the gate thing, and I'm able to drive in. And they had I parked, they had brought my dad to the very front, so there was like a lobby sitting area.
mhm,
I don't know how they pulled this off, but they brought him there, and he was, not my sister and brother had said that he hadn't been speaking the day before,
mhm,
so be prepared for that. And
mhm,
he wasn't talking when I got there, but then when I mentioned that his granddaughters, my daughter, Mary and Grace, wanted to talk to him on the phone because they weren't able to come, they were away, it was during summer. He was able to talk so he could talk to them on the phone. It was like a miracle. And then they had said he wasn't able to swallow, and this is so interesting. I don't know why, but I had stopped on the way there. I was there was nowhere that I knew, so it sounds funny, but there was a McDonald's, and he used to like milkshakes.
Uh-huh.
So I went through the drive-through, and I didn't know if couldn't remember what flavor, and I got the vanilla milkshake. They had said he wasn't talking and he wasn't swallowing, but he sure, took the milkshake, and he's so funny because he knew what was going on, and we all knew what was going on, right? And so afterwards I said, "How do you like the milkshake, Dad?" And he goes, "Next time bring chocolate." Next time bring chocolate. So
Oh,
somewhere up in heaven, I hope someone's bringing my dad a chocolate milkshake.
yeah.
But that was his last day, and I consider it a blessing that I got to see him. You
Yes.
that's another thing that sounds weird, but I've tried to find the levity in the sad moments. I don't know if you do that too, to just
Absolutely. Yes,
right,
there was a lot of humor,
right.
that you didn't expect, when during that time. And it was COVID for us too. And if I
It
hadn't
was.
gone out there in February of 2020, I may not have, because I'm in Ohio, I may not have been able to fly to California. And my
Right.
mom chose to die at home, but when the first week I was there, all her friends were coming by, they were bringing soup. It was like this. My mom was beloved and she had a lot of
Mhm,
friends and there was
mm,
so much support. And
mhm.
then all of a sudden it was lockdown. So it was just my daughter and I like running the show. And even the hospice visits were not nearly as frequent as we were told they were going to be. And
Mhm, mhm.
it was, I mean, we all know what it was like, during the pandemic. And it's very interesting the difference of dying in a pandemic. It's like the universe was like, hey, your mom's dying. Oh, and by the way, we're gonna make it really interesting by throwing a pandemic on top of this.
Right?
I mean, it changed everything. I don't know about you, but we
Mhm.
weren't able to have funerals for either one of them. My dad died in 2021 at the almost a year later. Was your family able to have any kind of a ritual or ceremony?
We had to wait quite a while. I do remember that. We had to wait quite a while, because it was done at the special, national cemetery down there. So yeah, I agree with you. There were all these different things you had to do and different times and wait and which sort of lengthened that period of sadness and grief because you weren't having closure or what felt what like it could be
Yeah.
closure, right?
Yes. And do you
Yeah.
feel like, that what when you became empowered and became a public speaker, that maybe that was
Mhm.
like a part of your getting that closure? Because I kind of felt like that's what this was like for me.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I love that you bring that up because now I can see that it was. I don't know if I would have realized that, but you're right. That was definitely because of the like you said, the feeling of empowerment and the feeling of I have a purpose now, and I have something to talk about, and I'm going to use my voice. I hadn't had necessarily found my voice prior, and so all of those experiences and all of that healing and the growth made me more confident and stand up taller and say, I have a voice and I'm going to use it. So, yes, I'm so glad you asked that question because that's absolutely true. That was all part of the empowerment and the feeling of I can do this,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. And it's like it feels like a way of honoring them to
Yeah.
me as well,
Yes.
that I
Beautiful.
for some reason was like, I need to do a podcast. It was so out of my comfort zone. I'd never done anything like it. But then when you think about it, both of
Mhm,
us have a psychology background
mhm,
and it's
mhm.
just a very kind of natural progression, I think,
Yes,
talking
yes,
to
and
people.
I'm really glad that you're doing it because I'll tell you why, as you probably have experienced. There's not that many people who want to talk about it, but I think it's only because they don't know how to talk about it. I
Yeah.
think it would actually be very healing to them and very cathartic. And
Mhm.
so if they can hear other people having discussions about it and it just being a normal conversation and it's okay, and even if we have some sadness or whatever, it's almost part of what you need to do. right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That was what I thought. Yeah. Where do we have these conversations? It's not like something you just bring up at a dinner party. Well, I do, but
Yeah, right. You and I need to have dinner. We'd be talking about this all dinner.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm
God,
so glad you're doing this, and I think
thank
that it's gonna
you.
be incredibly, incredibly healing for people to be able to hear other people's stories. And also, I think you have a community, correct? Connected, and how wonderful that people can have a community, your community, where they can reach out and ask for support or talk or, ideas or questions. Or I just think it's amazing
Yeah,
because people shy away from this when it happens to all of us. It's
exactly. It's like I almost think of it as like a club that none of us really wanted to join. And then you go through this initiation. And then once you're in this club, you'll never have the same perspective on any of this stuff again. But there's this almost like a bond, almost like a commonality. We have this common bond because, of course, every death is different and everybody grieves in a different way. But I remember in the early stages of my grief, I had an end of life doula, and I didn't
mm,
even know that there was such a thing. I kind of felt like I was my mom's end of a life doula, but I didn't really realize that it was a thing, right? And I kind of
mhm,
was all I ever thought about was death after it happened. And anytime I could talk to somebody, they would like, sometimes I know that we don't know what to say to somebody
mhm,
who's had a loss. I think everybody is just like, oh no, am I going to make them more sad if I bring it up? But
mhm,
for me, and I probably for you as well, I needed to talk about it. And this end of life doula, her name was Roxanne. I got to talk to her every week for an hour, and it was part of her internship on this path toward becoming an end of life doula. It
mhm,
was the most healing thing,
mm,
was just to be heard and validated and not
mhm,
somebody trying to fix it or somebody saying, "Why don't you just get over it?" or, "Get through it." I don't even know that we get through it as we go through the transformation, we kinda grow into it, or I'm
mhm.
not sure how to say it, but, it's like it doesn't go away,
Right,
but it becomes softer, maybe.
right.
Yeah. Wow.
I love hearing you talk about this concept of end of life doula because I had never heard of it before about a week ago. Brand new concept to me. And I thought, wow, what an amazing idea. Thank goodness this is here for people. I hope that we all start hearing about this and knowing about this because we need to, like you having this podcast, we need to be having these discussions and support for people because like we said, it happens to all of us,
Mhm.
and it's like we give so much celebration and attention to when someone's born, so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
And we have to honor them at the end as well. And we have to
Exactly.
honor those around them
Mhm.
as well. And
Yeah.
and and so I think that's incredible, and I think it's amazing that you are, as I said, talking about this and embracing this subject so that all of us can have a little bit more support, right?
Oh,
When we
thank you.
thank you.
Yeah. It's like I said, I felt called. I just felt called to do it. And I love that you just heard about end of life doulas because, you know, that needs to get out there more,
Mhm.
that's available for them to hold space for you and for that person. Because hospice is amazing, but
Mhm.
they have like an hour to be there, and
Right,
they're there to address like the physical,
right,
you know, needs
right.
of the person, right? But that end of life doula is there to hold space. And oh, how amazing it would have been if I would have had someone to hold space for me,
Mhm.
because I was the end of life doula and the grieving daughter, right? All at the same
Right.
time. It was COVID, man. It was just,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
it was just insane.
Can you tell
Or
me,
yeah.
is the end of life doula, are they there to mainly support the person who is passing or their family or both?
You know what? I think it depends because if you're somebody who has nobody, right? There's a
Mm,
lot of people think about that. People who just don't even have anybody to support them at the end of life. I mean, that's
mhm,
awful, right? So an end of life doula could be someone like that could support that person, but also somebody that supports the family. So it depends what is needed in the situation, and and I also think that they facilitate conversations
Mm,
because some families even within the experiences happening are very uncomfortable and people react in different ways
mhm,
too. Like for example, like my brother, he lives in El Segundo, that's where my parents lived, but he didn't want to see her as it progressed to the end because he wanted to remember her as she had been before it got worse and worse and worse, as it does with cancer.
mhm.
Whereas I didn't really have an option because I was there
Right.
every day. And as you see the progression, you kind of get used to it, even though
Mhm,
it's not really something you could ever get used to. So the end of life doula could help family members like kind of navigate who are having very different experiences around it. It's just an amazing thing. Like there's the one who my end of life doula was studying with, her name is Deanna Cochran, and
mhm.
her website is Quality of Life Care. And then there's another one, her name eludes me at the moment, but I'll remember it and I'll put it in the show notes. She
Okay.
has another thing. And so immediately after my mom passed, I thought I'm going to become an end of life doula. And they were so
Mhm,
kind because of course, I could have signed up and that would have been great for them too, right? But they said, you
mhm.
know what, it's too soon.
Ooh.
You can't do this right now, and
Oh,
they were
yeah.
so right,
Yes.
that
Mm.
it would have been too soon. And then now I thought, I could probably reach more people with the podcast than being an
Yes,
individual end of life doula for one
yes.
person.
I was just thinking that as you're saying that, I'm like, "Wow, and look, you're reaching so many more people by doing this. This is incredible."
Mm.
Wow. Wow, what a
Mm.
story. Mm.
Aw. So have you had any experiences in that after these passings where you kind of felt a sense of that person's presence or had any interesting little weird coincidences where you thought, yeah, that's my dad's here or anything like that?
Yeah, you know what's so interesting what is that there's been many a time when I my dad pops into my head as if I need to pick up the phone and call him, or that he's calling me, or and I think, Where's my dad?" And then I have to remember
Oh,
that
yeah.
he's gone, even though it's been, 3 or 4 years. Does that ever happen to you? Those just sort of
Yeah. When I first came home after my mom passed, I'm in Ohio, she's in California, so we would visit,
Mhm,
and after our visits, my mom and I, well, of course, way back in the day, there was no texting, but as texting
mhm,
became a thing, we texted all the time, but we didn't always call each other. But back
mhm,
before, soon as one of the visits was over, we would miss each other so much, and we would be calling each other, like,
mhm,
frequently, and then, it kinda peters out. But so when I first came home, I mean, I kept having this, like, feeling like, "I've gotta call her, I've gotta tell her what's happening now, and I've gotta see how she's doing." Yeah, and then you do,
mm,
your brain, it forgets. It's like,
mhm,
"Oh, I can't." Yeah,
mhm, mhm.
and
So
then
what
it
I
kind of hits you again.
Yes, yes, and what I try to do in those moments is remind myself that I can still talk to him. I just talk out loud, and I'll even, like, say, "Oh, wow, dad, I'm missing you," or I'm needing you," or "Something's making me think of you," or, you know,
Mhm,
yeah, I think that our connection to them can still be alive if we choose for it to be, and if we keep talking to them and keep remembering them, and, you know,
mhm,
uh, I try to live a better life now, and I try to be a better person in honor of all 3 of them.
mm,
And, I lost grandparents before them when I was younger,
mhm,
but these 3 deaths at the age that I was, and in the time frame and the way that they happened,
mm.
impacted me in such a different way. And, I'll never be the same. I imagine you feel that way as well, never be the same, and yet a lot of that is positive, ways that
Yeah,
I'll never be the
it
same.
is, and you don't expect that either. I did not expect that, which is why I say it's like a hidden gift, right? Because
Yeah.
especially when you're in it, and it hurts so much, I never expected that these big positive changes were gonna come, right? And It's
Yes.
been really an amazing, journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's incredible. And it's, another one of the hidden gifts, I think, is the intense gratitude. Right.
Yes. Right?
Intense,
Because you really get that tomorrow is not promised.
right?
Yeah. So
And
when your dad was sick, obviously, right? I mean, he was in a place and
yeah.
so it wasn't like a surprise probably. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a surprise, but
Yeah.
not like it sounds like maybe your brother, like it was unexpected.
Yes. Yes. And
Ah, and that,
very sudden and very tragic, very shocking. And I sometimes, when it happened, it was y- you go into shock and you think it's unbelievable and you can't believe it and how am I going to get through this? And I was navigating all of that in the months after that. And then 8 months later, I lost my cousin, and I felt, and I was even much closer to my cousin because he was married. He had a daughter the same age as my daughter, and we had a lot in common, and we used to, go on family trips together. And my brother had been a musician and in a different lifestyle, and just, it just happened that I had spent a lot more time with my cousin, and
mm,
certainly in recent years. But when that happened, I felt as if my family had been struck by lightning twice. And I remember wanting to have some understanding or explanation. And we get down on our knees, and I was praying, and I wanted understanding, and I wanted explanation. And what was beautiful was I did receive a message that there is no explanation and
yeah.
there is no understanding. And I fully embrace that concept of radical acceptance.
Oh, yes.
Radical
Mm,
acceptance. That is a gift, because you stop questioning everything and you stop needing an explanation for everything and you stop being a victim, and you just realize, a lot of maturity comes over you,
yes.
right?
You grow, you mature about 10 years in like a month. Ah,
And
yeah, I love what you said, radical. Yeah. Wow.
radical acceptance. And
Powerful.
then I just prayed. I kept praying and praying, and I heard three words: use your voice. And I knew it meant more than just use your voice. It meant,
Mm,
finally, Sarah, use your voice. Who are you?
mm,
You want to be?
mhm.
Stop hiding. Stop dimming your light. Stop worrying what everyone else thinks. Stop waiting and preparing and researching and thinking it. Go do it now. And then that became my movement. Do it now, do it now, do it now. Because I'm telling you, like you said, tomorrow is not promised.
Mm-mm.
And all the silly things that we worry about, or what other people think about us, or failing, or not being good enough, or any of that, it just becomes sort of irrelevant, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah. It's like none of that stuff matters. Like, don't sweat the small stuff, and it all becomes small stuff because it really narrows your focus about what matters here. And it's like, that connection we have with the people that we love. I mean, really, what else really is there, right? All the other stuff is just.
Right.
So
Right.
tell me about we met in that Find Your Voice challenge, and I
That's
remember
right.
the first day listening to you and feeling like, oh, I need to like get to know her a little bit better. I felt a connection with a lot of things you were saying and about, so that was a big part of it for me in, finding my voice. So your Do It Now, is that tell me about that because you have a podcast as well, right?
I have a podcast called Do It Now. I have a Facebook community called Do It Now, and I do speaker training now, incredibly, very quickly. When your why is really big, you can travel really quickly. And I call it sort of the slingshot method. You just go from A to Z. Boom, because of all the things that you were just mentioning, all the ridiculous, irrelevant things that you don't worry about, the small stuff, you just go out there and, you're sort of an interesting term, but I'm fighting for my life.
Mm.
I'm
Wow.
fighting for my life, the life of my dreams. I'm fighting for that life.
Mm.
And I'm not letting anything stop me. I'm not letting anybody scare me or tell me I can't do it. In fact, tell me I can't do it and I'll use that for fuel. Please. Like count against me and yes.
Yes.
You know,
Oh,
it's an interesting way to live your life because now all the people who could be my naysayers or haters, I'm like, yes, that means I'm finally talking about something, and
yeah.
I'm finally moving forward and making some headway, and I will just use all of that as fuel. Yes, thank you.
I love that. Exactly. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's like really good, it's really good advice for anybody, who's struggling. Even if like you don't even know how you're gonna get out of bed. It's like look for one good thing today, I
Yes.
mean, I remember sometimes that's where I was at. It's like, let's look for one good thing and start there, and then more things
Yes.
will show up, right? And the next thing
Yes.
you know, you have a movement.
Yes.
Now, uh,
Oh, I love you saying that though. That's such an important thing, looking for that one good thing because I do uh emotional wellness and mental health issues are very, very important to me. And I like to talk about those things as well. And I
mhm,
think that idea that you just said, find that one good thing. I remember there were being days I would just, if I could just get up to my kitchen sink and stand at my kitchen sink, I would put my rubber gloves on and the sound of the water and the suds and the making the dishes clean. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it was very therapeutic to me. Or if I could walk outside and hear the leaves rustling in the trees and the sound that that made.
yeah,
If I could see my dog doing zoomies at the park, there were things that if you just get to the present moment
mhm,
and then look around and try to find the just simple things that are right under your nose that
that
are
you don't take for granted anymore. That was a big thing. Like you can't take anything for granted, and I like that you said about the dishes because I think that was probably really grounding. It's something so normal, but you
Mhm.
were like, you had this heightened awareness and you noticed the sound of the water and the bubbles and things that we usually go through life. And it's like, oh, it's this chore. I just have to get it over with, But I love that you had that awareness, that you
Mhm.
probably wouldn't have had necessarily
Oh,
about the
yeah.
dishes, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, there were so many things I started to gather to help me, and I started to call it I would put them in my emotional first aid kit. There were things that I knew that I could turn to in those moments when I was really sad or really down or really filled with anxiety.
mhm,
And and I know a lot of people think of, the normal ones that could be like breathing techniques or I would go to yoga, I would go to hiking, I
mhm,
would reach out to friends and have a phone conversation and try to put my attention on them and not talking about, sad things, but
yeah,
you know, I would I would go to sleep at night and I would try to meditate, but my mind would fill with other thoughts. So then I started this practice of gratitude prayers. And so all I would allow thoughts in my mind were thoughts of gratitude. And they could be very simple to I'm so glad my legs work and I could walk around with my kids today. I'm so glad I have eyesight because I saw my daughter play tennis this afternoon in her tournament. My here, all the things that we take for granted. And I would just think about all those things and I would fall asleep and I would sleep soundly that night when other nights I had suffered from insomnia. Right. So I just started to come up with all these little things that I could try to help get through not only the sadness and the grief, but there's a lot of anxiety. I don't know if you had any of that come up for you during.
oh, yeah, yeah, and gratitude is so healing. It
Mhm.
instantly shifts your perspective. I journaled a lot. That was another thing that I did, which is how this whole book idea
Mm.
started
Mm.
to come to be. I journaled throughout the whole experience of while my mother was dying and like all the details of all the weird phases that the body goes through along the way. And I've always been a journaler, and that is really what kept me sane and grounded. through
Mm,
the whole thing, and then I had all of this stuff, and I'm like, I bet there's a lot of people for me, I had no idea, like, what was the actual moment of death gonna be. I was
mm,
terrified. I had no idea. I'd never done it. I've never seen it, like, up close, right? And so, yeah, that was a thing, and, I would journal about that, about, like, and I was afraid of the grief, I noticed for me, I was so afraid, what is that gonna feel like? 'Cause, I grew up where we weren't really allowed to show our,
mm,
feelings in my
mm,
household. It's like, "Don't cry or you'll get something to cry about," kinda thing, right? So, in that house, it was still very much like nobody was crying, nobody was we were all just we were trying to get through the day. And then I
mm,
had this moment, one of the things that I did that helped me too was music. Music will
mm,
always kind of break my heart open, and that's when
mm,
I can really get to for some reason, that's what will help me, right? Get
mhm,
it out of me. And so I remember this one night, I was laying in my childhood bedroom. It's it's really funny because my mom had so much stuff. It's an 850 square foot house, and there was 4 of us there, and, my daughter and I had to, like, take so many things out of the bedroom, and even then, it was like there was barely room to walk in there, and we shared a queen size air mattress for 3 months, my daughter and I did, and I still had the
wow.
feeling of, like, if you're gonna cry, do it really, really quietly so nobody knows, right? So I'm laying in my childhood bed one night, listening to Spotify, and this song came on. It's called Farewell, and it's just this really beautiful, sort of ethereal piano piece, and for some reason, that song literally just broke me open, and I was just sobbing, like, uncontrollably because I was so aware that I was here to say goodbye,
Mm,
and that that's really what this was. But the hidden
mm,
gift from that moment was that I knew this is what it feels like. Okay, this feels like crap, but I can get through it. And
mm,
from that moment, that was a huge transformational moment for me because from that moment on, even though I was still scared and it was hard and blah, 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 I was like, I can get through this. I'm not gonna die. It's not gonna hurt so bad that I'm gonna be able to get back up. So that was one of my ways of and I made this playlist and I just kept adding more songs to it. And for a while
right?
I would go to my playlist and it was my grieving place. Like, I knew if I listened to the playlist that I was gonna cry, but it was like
Mhm,
when I felt like I needed to cry, because it doesn't come easily to me, it did that year, but in
mhm,
general, right, I
mhm,
would just I'd be somewhere alone, I'd put that playlist on, and I would
mhm,
just get the grief out because I knew, like, on some level that it's gonna come out one way
mhm,
or the other, and you might as well try to do it in a healthy way. Don't
mhm,
hold on to it. Just
mhm,
let it, like, let it go. And the
mhm,
music really helped me to do
mm.
that.
Oh, yeah, I think that's really healthy to do if you is to give yourself those times to have those deep cries, those heavy
Mhm.
cries. That's so good that you did that. That's such a smart thing for
Yeah,
people to do too, and I agree with you that music can really bring that out, you know?
yeah.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about that. I don't know why it made me remember my mother-in-law, my children's grandmother, but she died over 16 years ago because Mary wasn't born yet. I'm so sad that Mary not
Mm,
never got to meet her. But you talking about that in the music reminded me of Marion, and she passed away from pancreatic cancer, and it was such a you were mentioning, like, watching the
mhm.
process of that.
That's what my
And
mom had too, pancreatic.
oh, she did.
Mhm.
So you
Yeah,
know what it does to the body and the pain and
the
suffering,
pain.
and I think back on those times and how incredibly brave Marion was, and I had forgotten that when she did pass, we were all around her, not the grandchildren that were around that time, but the adults, and we were all around her and holding her hand through those last seconds, and how actually it was more peaceful than I thought it would be, you know? Even though the time and the months prior had been sadly watching her suffer, she
Mm,
had been very courageous and brave, and she wanted to be around everybody. She was such a loving,
mm,
beautiful I mean, her light just shone, it shined so brightly, right? and there were so many people that loved her, and so I think in that moment, what I'm remembering, and I hope it's okay having these, conversations,
Everything's okay. Absolutely everything is okay.
is that I remember there was so much love. There
Yeah.
was so much love at her bedside, and it was all of us kind of holding hands and trying to hold her hand, and, the breaths got very slower and very
Mhm.
till, and I only mention this because I don't some people maybe have never been there when someone's
Right.
passed, but
Exactly.
the moments around it were f all I can think of now in my memory is love.
Yeah.
It's the only memory I have
Yeah.
from those last seconds and the
Yeah. It
love.
becomes a very sacred space. Yeah. Especially when you do have the people surrounding that person.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's really kind of amazing, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, so I know that sounds weird, like as sad as it is at the same time. I mean, it's so natural. It's gonna happen to all of us, but it's not common in our society. Death has been pushed into the hospital or the nursing home, or, it's not like in the old times when you had multi generations living in the home and people saw death and we don't see it. And it's sacred. There's something really, mm,
Very sacred and also surprisingly very beautiful, and
yeah. And when somebody has something like pancreatic cancer, there's there's this relief too. And I think that helped us with the process because you're just like, how can they possibly suffer any more than they're already suffering, you know? Oh, yeah, that's a brutal one.
yeah. Big, heavy
Big,
topics,
heavy
but
soup,
it's
I
good to
know, but
talk
you
about
gotta
them.
talk about. So what were some of the other in your toolbox? What were some of your other, tools, and are these things that you share with your clients now
Yes.
as well?
Yes, absolutely. I would say, well, you mentioned the journaling, which I think is incredible. Uh, some of the I had this term that I always use, leave no stone unturned.
Mm,
So each individual person, because it is very individual to everybody. For someone, painting might be the thing that really allows them to have some relief.
mm,
Uh, I tried acupuncture, and
mhm,
that worked for me. Prayer works, going to church, being around community.
mhm,
Uh, I would say that I started to spend a lot more time alone,
mhm,
and I don't want to use the word isolating myself, but I use the word quieting myself.
mhm.
I had been a very social person and around a lot of people and always had a lot of friends and was always organizing a lot of activities. And maybe it was after the lockdown that we had naturally stopped doing that anyways.
Yeah.
And maybe I realized that, wow, that was actually parts of that were really good for me.
Mhm.
And now that I'm going through these really difficult, challenging times, I want to get through them in a quiet way, looking inside of myself for the answers instead of looking outside of myself for the answers. So I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time alone, and people have to be okay with that because it's different to feel alone but not lonely, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
started to read more. I started to just be quiet a lot more and not have to be with other people and not have to keep myself so busy. And maybe that was also my intuition with my background in psychology and counseling and coaching, was that you have to make sure, Sarah, that you don't distract yourself and keep yourself so busy that you don't have time to sit with these emotions that are really painful and really hard. Because you're going to deal with them one way or another at one time or another. So you can do it now,
Yeah.
or you
You
can
could
stuff
say
them down and wait for them to pop up in a couple
yeah,
years.
in some self-destructive way, right? Yeah. Yeah, I know those things like just sometimes being busy, I think, yeah, you're just trying to distract yourself. And sometimes that's okay. But like you said, you've got to deal with it sooner or later. And yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know.
and I think the other big lesson I learned during this time is just to be more compassionate with myself, right?
Mm,
Easier on myself,
yeah,
forgive myself, let
yeah.
it go, right?
And yeah. Just give yourself grace, you know? And I found that it's made me more patient and more compassionate toward other people too, because you don't know what anybody's going through.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right, yeah.
I remember walking my mom's dog. That was my thing. That was kind of like my break for the day. In the middle of the day, I would walk their dog, and she was so
Mm,
cute.
mm,
And I remember walking and looking around and looking at people. And yeah, it was the pandemic and it was all weird, but just everybody was like complaining, "Oh, we're at home," and but and I was thinking, yeah, but you're in your home. Your mom's not dying. Not that I don't know what's going on with anybody either. They might have been going through something horrible. But this woman, and she was just a stranger, and we just started talking, and it just came out what was happening with me. And
mm,
she was amazing. She was so compassionate, and she's like, "Oh my God," and I just thought how when we're walking around in the world, you don't know what anybody's going through, right? So just kind of give them grace, and
yeah.
that was a kind of a lesson for me, when don't rage drive anymore if someone's going slow or whatever. Like I have so much more of an awareness.
Absolutely, absolutely, and don't you also feel sort of more connected to humanity? I feel like if we look into someone's eyes, we can tell if they need even a smile, a hello, a hug, but we need to, as human beings, do that more nowadays because we've gotten used to looking down at our phones,
Oh
right?
my yes.
And I can be guilty of that as well. I try now when I'm in a public place because I've been in some like a dentist's office or a doctor's office recently, and you'll be sitting around. And before, I remember years ago, we used to look at each other and make conversation and
Yeah.
talk. And now everybody's looking down, and when they're walking, they're looking down. And so I really try to make eye contact with people and look at them.
Mhm. That's
So
funny that, to think about that, how we did all used to make eye contact and like just kind of like what's behind the scenes psychologically that doing to us as a culture that,
mm.
yeah. I was at the dentist today, and me and the dentist and her assistant ended up having this whole conversation about death because she had
Oh.
just lost her father and her mother-in-law, her stepmother. 2 days
Mhm.
ago, she'd lost her stepmother. And so it's funny because since I started the podcast, I feel like everywhere I go, I end up having these conversations with people. I just need to record all of them. But I think, and I don't know if you find this, but like there's like a vibe that we kind of give out, and I feel like people, energetically can
Mhm.
sense that, and especially, being in psychology, and I did hair for years too, and you might as
Right.
well be a
No.
psychologist if you're gonna do hair, but it seems to have become even more heightened in this post loss space.
I
That
absolutely agree with you. My daughters would always say that people with me share, like, really share really quickly. And before, I thought it was because I have that background in psychology and counseling and life coaching. But as I've moved forward through these even harder times and more grieving, people do it even more. And I think you're right. I think there's an openness to
Mhm.
you and I and people who have gone through loss and grief like this. There's an openness and a sort of, just authentic, raw, naked, like you can say anything, you can tell me, I'm here. I'm not going to judge.
Yeah,
I
right.
can listen. I can maybe it's that thing that you were saying about holding space, you know,
Mm. Ah,
I can
yeah.
hold space for you, even if it's for a couple minutes. I can hold
Right.
space for you.
And maybe that's what that person needed. Maybe that person in the grocery store, that's what she needed that day. Somebody to hold space for like a few minutes? And then isn't that a gift when you
Yes,
all of a sudden ended up being the person in that place and time? You
yes.
don't really know maybe what you did for that person, but it's
Yeah,
just your
yeah.
presence. Yeah. Wow. So many hidden gifts.
Hidden gifts. I love this theme. It's beautiful.
Thank
It's
you.
really beautiful.
Yeah. Is there
Yeah.
anything that like I didn't ask you that you would like to share? 'Cause I feel like I could sit here and talk to you for, like, a couple of
I
hours, but
know,
obviously
I
it's
know. I'm thinking maybe we'll just have to get together again and have
so, yeah.
round 2, and I know I'm gonna have you, on my podcast.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that.
Yeah, no,
Very
I just,
cool.
anyone who wants to have any inspiration, they can join my, Do It Now community on Facebook.
Yeah.
And it's about going after your dreams or going after anything that you wanted to do in this lifetime. And we're all there to support each other and encourage each other. And it's also for people who maybe are later in life who wanna do that because, I was 54 when I decided to do all these crazy things that I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm 59.
You're 59, wow,
So,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because our battle cry is, "It's not too late, we're just getting started."
Oh, I love that. And I think for us, for women, it having a later in life start is, I think it's pretty normal because of what you were saying in the beginning, what we're supporting our spouse and raising our
Mhm,
children, and you do kind of lose yourself. You're like, well, what? I don't know, what did I want before all of this of this happened?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Thank you for having me today. This has
You're
been
so
lovely.
welcome. It's been so fun. Thank you so much for coming on. Look forward to talking to you again. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.